It all began with a letter taped to my gate. Thin paper, heavy with trouble. The HOA's seal stared at me like a warning sign. My stomach twisted before I even opened it, because in my neighborhood, no letter from the HOA ever brought good news. The words were simple but sharp. Repaint your barn. 30 days. No choice. No argument. I stood there in disbelief. The barn had stood strong for decades, and now suddenly it was a problem? I didn't realize then that this single sheet of paper was about to spark a war. The barn was more than wood and nails. It was history. My father had painted it himself long before the HOA existed. It wasn't falling apart. It wasn't unsafe. Its faded red walls told stories of summers, storms, and years of hard work. But now, apparently, it didn't meet community standards. That evening, I read the letter aloud on the porch while my wife frowned and my kids giggled. So, they want it repainted? I asked. Yes, my wife said cautiously, but please don't do anything crazy. I leaned back in my chair, a grin spreading across my face. Crazy? No. But clever? Definitely. They wanted fresh paint? Fine. I'd give them paint so bright, so outrageous, it would leave them choking on their own rules. Because here's the thing, the letter didn't say what color. And if Karen, our power-hungry HOA president, thought she could control me, she was about to learn that I don't fold easily. I decided then, my barn wouldn't just be repainted. It would become a symbol. And the color? The loudest, most impossible pink I could find. The next morning, I drove into town on a mission. Hardware store after hardware store, I searched. I wanted something shocking, something so unnatural it would burn into everyone's memory. At the third shop, I found it. The clerk squinted as he mixed the color, the machine whirring before producing a paint so vibrant it seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights. You painting a child's playhouse? He asked. I smirked. No. A barn. The man nearly dropped the can. That's bold. 2 days later, brushes, rollers, and ladders were lined up by the barn. A few neighbors who were tired of Karen's nitpicking stopped by to help. We laughed, splattered paint, and turned those weathered red planks into a screaming neon spectacle. By sunset, the barn glowed like a giant highlighter in the middle of the countryside. Drivers slowed down, kids pointed and giggled, and I leaned against the fence sipping sweet tea, waiting. Because I knew Karen, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she came storming down the road, clipboard in hand, ready for war. The next morning, the gossip spread faster than wildfire. My phone buzzed with texts. Did you seriously paint your barn pink? Karen's storming around like she's about to explode. Man, that thing can be seen from half a mile away. By mid-morning, I heard the roar of tires on gravel. Karen's SUV screeched to a stop, dust flying. She flung her door open, stomped out, and marched toward me with the fury of a general leading an army. This, she screeched, pointing at the barn, is unacceptable. I sipped my coffee. You said repaint. I repainted. Not like this, she barked. Neon pink is not an approved color. I raised the letter, waving it slightly. Funny, because it doesn't mention approved colors. Just says repaint. Her face flushed the same shade as the barn. Neighbors slowed their cars just to watch. One honked and gave me a thumbs up. Karen's jaw clenched so hard I thought her teeth might break. This will be brought before the HOA board immediately, she spat. Good, I replied. I'll see you there. The stage was set. And if Karen thought she had me cornered, she was wrong. The night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Folding chairs lined the walls, whispers filled the air. My barn had become the town's new attraction. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Karen sat at the head of the table, gavel in hand, lips pursed so tight they could crack a walnut. She slammed the gavel. This meeting is called to order, she barked, glaring at me. She wasted no time. The homeowner at 214 Meadow Creek has committed a gross violation by painting a structure an outrageous neon color. I motion for immediate fines and repainting. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I stood, calm and steady, and held up the letter. This is what I received. It says Repaint. Nowhere does it mention color restrictions. I followed the order exactly. Gasps. Even board members exchanged uneasy glances. Karen slammed her palm against the table. It's implied, she shouted. Everyone knows barns must be neutral. From the back, a neighbor spoke. Actually, I think it looks great. My kids love it. Laughter broke out. A few neighbors even wore pink shirts in solidarity. Karen's control was slipping, and she knew it. The board whispered among themselves while Karen's face turned redder by the second. She pounded the gavel so hard the head nearly flew off. Order! Order! She screeched. I took a deep breath, then pressed harder. If the HOA wants to enforce color rules, then those rules need to be written down. Until then, I have every right to keep my barn exactly as it is. The room buzzed. One board member adjusted his glasses. He's right, Karen. The letter doesn't specify. Karen's glare could have burned through steel. But the more she pushed, the more neighbors rallied behind me. The barn wasn't just paint anymore. It was rebellion. Finally, the board leaned back. Unless an explicit rule has been broken, we can't fine him, one member announced. Karen looked like she might faint. But she wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. I walked out that night with neighbors clapping me on the back, telling me to stand strong. For a moment, I thought I'd won. But the war was far from over. The next morning, hammering jolted me awake. I pulled on my boots and rushed outside, and froze. Karen stood there with two contractors, erecting a massive white tarp across the barn like they were covering up a crime scene. What the hell do you think you're doing? I shouted. Karen turned, smug. If you won't fix this monstrosity, the HOA will. We're covering it until you comply. I pulled out my phone. Touch that barn again, and you'll be charged with trespassing and property damage. For the first time, Karen faltered. The contractors dropped their tools, clearly unwilling to risk legal trouble. You can't intimidate me, she snapped. I'll take this to county code enforcement. The housing authority. Anyone who will listen. I smiled coldly. Go right ahead. Because I've already filed a complaint about HOA harassment. And they're very interested in your little stunt. Her eyes widened. She hadn't expected that. The contractors left. Karen sputtered threats, but deep down she knew the tide was turning. This wasn't just a fight over paint anymore. It was about power, and Karen was losing hers. Word spread quickly. Within a week, county inspectors weren't knocking on my door. They were investigating the HOA. Turns out, Karen had been overstepping for years. Making up fines. Enforcing rules that weren't in the bylaws. Intimidating residents into silence. When the dust settled, the board had no choice but to remove her as president. She was banned from holding office again. As for my barn, it stayed neon pink. In fact, I added string lights around the roofline so it glowed like a carnival at night. Families drove from nearby towns just to see it. Some even took selfies in front of it. And every time Karen drove past, forced to live in the very neighborhood she once ruled, she had to look at the monument to her downfall. One evening, I sat on the porch, raised a glass, and admired the glowing pink. It wasn't just a barn anymore. It was proof that sometimes, the best way to fight pettiness isn't with anger, but with humor. A paintbrush, a bucket of neon, and the courage to stand tall. For the first time in years, the neighborhood finally felt free.